All right, so we're talking about trajectory theory, and the thing that is unique about this aspect of developmental theories is that trajectory theory kind of combines the two legs that we've already looked at. So, trajectory theories look at aspects of life course theories as well as looking at aspects of latent trait or propensity theories as well. And what trajectory theory suggests is that there isn't just one thing that encourages criminal behavior, that there are multiple pathways and there are multiple individuals who have unique tendencies towards specific types of crime. So it looks at both the learning pathways and exterior influences of life course theories, combining that with the interior motivations and propensities of propensity and latent trait theories. So, trajectory theory kind of takes a full spectrum look at why individuals end up on criminal offending pathways. Um, One of the things that they look at, however, are how certain factors influence these trajectories. So they look at gender and how that influences trajectory patterns. They look at age and how that impacts trajectory patterns. They look at personality or psychological factors that interfere or encourage or reduce trajectory pattern theories. Um, some of our theorists look at very specific patterns, very specific pathways into crime and offending, and others group them more on a generalized level. The two theorists that we're going to look at are Loeber and Terry Moffat. Okay, but again, the trajectory theories, like all developmental theories, look at a variety of different things that influence. They combine both the biological, the psychological, environmental, sociological factors together rather than looking at one snapshot version of definition. All right. In terms of age and offending patterns, we understand that as an individual grows through adolescence and into young adulthood, that crime generally drops off. So offending patterns tend to desist of their own volition as an individual ages and matures. But there are some other significant things that we have learned about age and offending patterns as well. Personality and offending trajectories, we have noticed some distinct factors in terms of personality disorders that impact long-term advancement into career criminals. And we also look at chronic offending and non-offending individuals. There are instances where trajectory theorists will look at non-offenders in situations that have a high density of population of an offending population. So they view actually the non-offenders in these particular circumstances as being the deviants because they are deviating away from the cultural norm by being a non-offender. So some of our theorists look at that comparison as well. In terms of pathways to crime, Loeber's theory pathways to crime, he breaks this down into three distinct areas, and actually we're going to move to the next slide to look at this a little more closely. So he has individuals broken down into three categories: the authority conflict pathway, overt pathway, and the covert pathway. And understanding where an individual starts in terms of early onset, mid onset, or late onset is important in understanding the influence across the trajectory. But looking at these three distinct groups, we can see at the bottom triangle there have authority conflict pathway. These are the individuals that engage in criminal activity prior to about the age of 12. And the type of deviant behavior that shows up is in resisting authority, being defiant, using anger to control situations and manipulate adults into doing what they want to do. Think in terms of the uh, child in the grocery store that screams at the top of his lungs and stiffens himself, refusing to cooperate with the parent. Um, and how that behavior, that defiance and disobedience is responded to, has an influence over how that child learns to use that as a tool or not to use it as a tool. But as the child ages, and you can see on the left hand side there, there's a continuum between early onset and late onset. And on the right hand side, you can see in terms of gender that many of the boys, this is the percentage of boys, the line on the right hand side, many of the boys start earlier than girls do. But in this authority conflict pathway, the negative deviant behavior starts early, before the age of 12. It develops patterns of defiance and disobedience, moving into um, significant situations of authority avoidance. And that can manifest in a lot of different ways, not necessarily just criminal, but truancy, running away, staying out past curfew, and intentionally breaking rules and disrupting things. And then Lobert suggests as well that there are two other pathways that generally start a little later into adolescence. And there's an overt pathway and a covert pathway. The overt pathway is one that we expect somewhat. I mean, you have young boys that are bullies, they're aggressive, minor aggressions, minor fights, disturbances, arguments with teachers, and those types of things. Eventually, that moves into a more direct physical manifestation of defiance with fighting. It can then result in partnering with peers that are engaging in similar activity, developing into gang activity. And this type of overt pathway actually lends itself towards violence as being the primary type of offending pattern that this particular deviant engages in, according to Lobert. And the type of violence just changes as the individual ages. So the bully on the schoolyard, pushing people around, turns into the high schooler that is in fights and in joining gangs. Then, even as that person ages, they may move away from the gang and into a intimate relationship where they are using violence to control, either rape or strong arm their partners or other individuals. On the other side of the triangle, the triangle on top, you see his covert pathway. And this is, again, a pathway into criminal offending. It's just a different type of pathway. And in the covert pathway, the behavior is more hidden, less extroverted. It's shoplifting, it's lying, it's manipulating, it's fraud rather than robbery. Different pattern of behavior, which moves eventually into, as the child develops into adolescence, into property damage, vandalism, and property destruction, which eventually moves itself again into what he designates as moderate to just severe delinquency, so fraud, burglary, serious theft. And these are two of our main categories of criminal offending patterns. And generally, we find patterns of behavior that are reflective of a type of criminal offending. So an individual that writes checks may also be committing burglaries, with the likelihood that an individual who is committing assaults will continue on that pathway into other violent crimes such as robbery is higher than the individual that's committing burglaries and check frauds. So moving back to Terry Moffat's developmental theory of crime. This is a little bit of a different perspective. Moffat has two main types of antisocial offenders that he categorizes in his theory of crime. He has adolescent limited offenders and he has life course persistent offenders. And in Moffat's theory, he groups these two individuals, or these two groups are reflective of individuals that take different pathways, both involved in criminal offending, but one is a long-term pattern and one is not. Life course persistent offenders are really ones who begin to behave antisocially early on, so reflective back to that authority conflict pathway of Laubier, um, and they continue this behavior on into adulthood. Whereas adolescent limited offenders reflect the vast majority of juvenile offenders, and they're, according to Moffat, they're motivated by this gap between their biological maturity and their social maturity. So, in other words, their hormones have risen to a level where they want to have more authority in their life. They want to have more control over their lives, more say about what they're doing and how they're doing it. But they don't really have the social maturity to be able to handle that type of hormonal shift. And this creates a conflict for these adolescent limited offenders. So they spend a lot of time trying to figure out how to balance new responsibility with a desire for more responsibility, and really an inability to handle that. So oftentimes these adolescent limited offenders are mimicking what they see in other individuals, behavior patterns that are antisocial, and they are picked up easily by these adolescent limited offenders struggling with that newfound sense of responsibility. And in terms of sustainment, they continue with this type of deviant behavior temporarily. It's adolescent limited, so it is limited to that period of adolescence, but they continue with it based on learning theory principles, and that the more that they learn, the more effective they are in terms of committing crimes and continuing to handle that. Public policy implications for this particular group of theorists, for our life course theorists, our trajectory, or I'm sorry, for our propensity or latent trait theorists, as well as our trajectory theorists. There are several public policy results from this type of theoretical approach. Multi-systematic treatment is one of the primary ones. This right here is something we see reflective in behavioral health systems. Systemic treatments are wraparound services. So intense family and community-based treatment designed to make really positive changes using all kinds of social systems. So they use a variety of social systems. They work with the home and the parents in developing skills there. They work at the educational level with the schools, including peers and teachers and administrators at the campus. Community and peer relations are part of this as well. And they try to use all of these different tactics to that contribute to the serious antisocial behaviors of children and adolescents who are at risk for out-of-home placement. So multi-systemic treatment, you see that locally at Fresno County Department of Behavioral Health uses that type of approach. In terms of personal, social, educational, family services, these types of approaches, understanding developmental theories, we approach all right, so in terms of personal development, we look at working with individuals in the development of soft skills, social skills, understanding that conflict resolution and these types of approaches have to have personal resignation with the individual. Increase in educational levels to increase the ability for allocation of information, secure employment, livable wages, family services to address dynamics within the family that are perpetuating the criminal pathways, um, intervention in terms of academic, social competence, educational enhancement. These are things that have been proven to improve the outcomes of individuals involved in the criminal justice system based in developmental theories. Uh, all right, and that is as far as we are going with this, and we will look at victimology next.